Hello, I'm Lucy from Book Act, and I'm here today with part 1 of my May reading wrap. Now I know it's a little bit early in the month to be doing a reading wrap up, but we've got an awful lot to get through this month. So we're going to split it in two to stop it being the longest video in the whole world ever. And I have got 4 books to talk to you about, 2 of which were pretty good, one of which was really good, and one of which unfortunately was really not. So shall I start with the ones that were pretty good? I'll take you through those. First up, I am going to talk about Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. Now, this is a book that's been all over the place, actually. I've seen it loads and loads on BookTube, and that's what sort of brought it to my attention. It is set in a place called Shaker Heights in America, which is sort of a town that is striving for perfection in every single way. It has been carefully planned and plotted, and everything about it is precision engineered. Nothing has been left to chance. So it is sort of what the residents think everyone else should be aspiring to. And this sort of idea about aspiring to perfection is sort of what the novel is about. It opens in a really dramatic way, actually, with one of these perfect houses in Shaker Heights being burnt to the ground, and everybody assumes it is by one of the children or one of the teenagers who lives there. And then the book sort of throws you back in time and leads you through the events that culminate with this fire. And it centres around 2 families, one who is the perfect all-American family who lived in this house, and they are sort of pitted against this mother-daughter combo who are the opposite of everything that they represent, this sort of bohemian artist, single mother who, flies along with the wind and does what she feels, and they come into conflict, but sort of very gentle conflict, not straight up blows, but a conflict that is all around the discussion of what it is to be perfect and who really defines what perfection is. And it does that mostly through looking at themes around motherhood, because the central sort of thrust of the story comes from sort of actually a set of characters who aren't the main characters. They are another family who were unable to have a child, and they have adopted this, or they very nearly adopted this Chinese American baby. But at the very last moment, the baby's mother, who had given her away for adoption, comes back and wants the child back. So the plot really is about who gets this child, but in sort of resolving that plot, these 2 other families, who are the main stories, are put on opposite sides of the debate, and we look at all different sort of forms of motherhood, really. So discussions about infertility and surrogacy and adoption, and how you communicate with the family that you do have as well, and all the sort of different forms of mother-daughter relationships that these 2 main families have and are triggered by sort of the adoption scandal that's going on in the middle. So I really liked the pacing in this story. I really liked the characterization. That was really fabulous. I thought that Ng was brilliant in squishing so much life into all these different characters and making them really different and really believable and human and flawed. And I loved the conversations that resulted about morality and perfection, and also sort of class and race and privilege, and all those conversations that it brought to the fore. What I didn't like quite so much was, I think that it started in a really dramatic way with this fire, which was never really quite resolved, I think. we learn who started the fire, we learn why they started the fire, but actually it was really sort of secondary to everything else in the book. And I don't know whether I ever quite bought what was happening there, and didn't feel that I hadn't just been sort of manipulated a little bit with a literary device of being thrown into some, you know, super high, deep action, which isn't really what this book is about. The other thing actually, which didn't bother me, but may bother other people, was that all these discussions that are happening, I felt pretty sure that I knew which side of the debate the author came down on in every single case. I didn't feel that she always wore her opinions lightly, and integrated them seamlessly into what the characters felt. It didn't really bother me because largely I agreed with her. But if you took a totally different standpoint, maybe you might feel that opinions were being pressed on you ever so slightly. But overall, brilliant characterization, a really unusual story, and a really compelling read that I did really, really enjoy. The next book that I read was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. Now, I read this as a buddy read actually with a few people over on Bookaxe, and we talked about it as we went along, which was a really great experience because they actually largely agreed with me, I think, but also pointed out some things that I maybe hadn't quite got my finger on. But again, I know that this is a really popular book on BookTube and in the wider world, because let's face it, there is a world outside BookTube, but I can totally see why. It is a fantasy novel set in probably, I guess, medieval Russia a very long time ago, sort of feudal Russia, in the wilderness, in the most amazing, fantastical forest. And the main character is a young woman called Vasa, who I guess she's born at the beginning of the book, and by the time the book ends, she's a teenager. And we follow her through her sort of growing up in this Russian wilderness, where she comes from sort of a relatively privileged wilderness family, but you know, in wilderness terms, that's not still super privileged. It's not really a point. But what is the point is that actually she is one of very, very few number of people in this Russian wilderness who can talk to the spirits. So she sees little creatures in the forest and in her house and all over the place. And she can talk to them in a way that nobody else really quite can. But despite the fact that nobody else really talks to them or really even kind of knows whether they exist or not, they still have sort of these fairy tales going around. That means they respect the spirits and they leave them little offerings and they ask for their protection. So no one sort of necessarily would say that they believe in them, but they're not brave enough to say that they don't, just in case something bad happens, which obviously, because it's a book, it does. And what happens is a priest is sent to live in the village, and he thinks that all these people talking to these spirits are utterly godless, and these spirits clearly don't exist, and they should all be worshipping God instead all the time and leave the spirits alone. So he pressures the town and guilts the town into abandoning the spirits and stopping giving them offerings. And Vasa, of course, knows that actually these offerings really count, and that because of these offerings, they are being protected from, you know, death in the forest and all the bad spirits that could come out. So she's sort of battling the priest and the townsfolk to not abandon everyone. But obviously, they choose the priest over sort of the crazy little witch girl that they think she is, and darkness starts to creep out of the forest and terrible things happen. It is really beautifully written. It has the most amazing fairy tale vibe. It's so evocative and just creates this really engrossing world. And you know, for once actually it was quite sunny in Britain and reasonably warm, but I was back in the snowy forest in the ice cold, and it was magical. Loved the writing. I loved Vasa as well. She was a really engaging heroine. She's not sort of, you know, your beautiful genteel sort of heroine. She's really rugged and ambitious and gutsy. I nearly swore then, but I liked her. She's really, really great. I liked the relationship as well that she had with all her siblings. I think that was really beautifully drawn. What I didn't like quite so much was it was pretty slow, I felt, getting out the blocks. The last 100 pages, 150 pages were so action-packed and so exciting, and really I wanted more. But it wasn't until that point really that it kicked into gear for me. I felt that the beautiful writing sustains me through the early part of the book, but we didn't even see the darkness in the forest, the evil that they are technically fighting, until 3/4 of the way through the book, maybe even a little bit more. So I would have liked to see that earlier on. My other criticism is probably more about managing my own expectations than the book itself, because it is part of a trilogy. So actually it has a pretty big cliffhanger ending. So whilst the last 150 pages were really good, I was still kind of a bit unsatisfied, because by that time I was really enjoying it. I really wanted to know what happens next, and that's it, it's over. But I definitely would look out for the next part of the trilogy, which has already been released, and then the third part when it does come out. It definitely was good enough that I would certainly do that. Now that leaves us with 2 books, one of which is Beartown by Fredrik Backman, and one of which is The Surface Breaks by Louise O'Neill. Which one was the stinker, do you think? I'm really sorry, Louise O'Neill. It was this one. Oh, I was so disappointed, because look, it's beautiful, and I never go into books and go into reading and raps and all these things wanting to slag things off. I truly don't. I want to like every book I read, but truly the best thing about this is the cover. There was so little inside it that I found to enjoy, unfortunately. It is a feminist retelling, as they pitch it, of The Little Mermaid, and it follows a 15-year-old mermaid called Gaia, I think is how you pronounce her name, who lives in the waters, again, I think, off the coast of Ireland. And she is part of a big mermaid family. Her father is the king. She has lots of sisters. Her mother, she thinks, may possibly be alive, although the common consensus is that she is in fact dead, and she was captured by humans, terrible, awful humans who no one should ever like if you're a mermaid or a merman. But she doesn't quite buy it. Her father, the king, is pretty hideous. He is not a nice person, merman, at all, and she is desperately unhappy. On her 15th birthday, which is where the book starts, in the world of mermaids, you were allowed to go up to the surface for the very first time, and she desperately goes up, sort of searching for something to do with her mother, something, a bit of a better life, I guess. She wants to know what is beyond this little part of the sea that she lives in. And what she sees when she goes up is a beautiful, beautiful man, a human man, and instantly she falls completely and utterly head over heels in love. However, one of the reasons that she was so incredibly miserable on the bottom of the sea is that she was just an object, and the only thing that mattered to anyone about her was her beauty. And she'd been betrothed to a really horrible man who she knew didn't really like her, but only valued her beauty and her looks and her status. And then she goes to the surface and she sees a beautiful man, and she does exactly the same. Oh, good Lord. So the plot then is her trying to get this man to fall in love with her. It's kind of like The Little Mermaid, as you would know in Disney. It gets a little bit different, but that's the gist plot-wise. The plot bothered me, but even more than the plot, the writing bothered me. Oh no, it was just really crude, I felt. Oh no. Not sort of, blue language type of crude, just in terms of everything was explained to us. The dialogue was really stayed. It didn't feel natural to me. It felt like people explaining things to other people for the benefit of the reader. Constantly through the entire novel. We weren't left to discover anything at all about the characters or their lives or the plot even through sort of exploration or sort of just watching and seeing what happens. Everything was told to other people all the time, and it really just felt incredibly flat for me, which was really disappointing. Okay, I'm wondering now how brutal I am allowed to be about this book, because I feel bad saying it, but I have to be honest. I don't do it very often. I really like Louise O'Neill on Twitter. I followed her for years, and her other books I know have had amazing press, and I've always been like, oh, I really like the sound of those books. I want to read them. I just hadn't quite got around to them, which is why I jumped at the chance to read this. But the whole way through, I was just thinking, how did this get published? I was thinking, would this have been published if this was a debut author and she hadn't had such success with her other stuff? It just didn't have any depth for me whatsoever. I'm sorry. Anyway, I should probably stop talking about it, because the next book made up for it by the bucket load. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a contender, possibly, for one of my books of the year. This is the first book that I've read this year, maybe the second, where I'm like, oh my goodness me, it was so good. Beartown by Fredrik Backman. Everybody read this book. Right, it is, well, do you know what? When I heard about it, what I was hoping was that it was going to be like a cross between Friday Night Lights and The Mighty Ducks. I was really excited by a book that could possibly be that. And it is, but it's also got a lovely sprinkling of Scandi noir going on, which just makes it so good. What's it about? In my wrap-up, my TBR video, I said that it was set in Alaska. I was wrong, it's set in Sweden. But everything else was pretty much right. It is the story of a hockey team in small town back beyond Swedish forest. And this town is sort of in major decline. It has had its day. There's not really any jobs. It's dark for an awful lot of the time. The people are just exhausted and they have no opportunities. And they are obsessed by this hockey team, this teenage hockey team, the school hockey team, who they see as their opportunity to get a little bit of pride back in the town, to say, there's this brilliant line where they say something like, people describe Beartown as, oh, well, if you're on the road to head and you reach Beartown, you've gone too far. And I was just like, oh yes, they don't want to be that town anymore. So they want to have this pride, but also there's a more, tangible reason why they love this hockey team. And it's that the boys are on the cusp of winning a national championship. And along with all the pride and the glory that they'd get, actually, they'd get some sort of economic revival. There's been promises that they will build a new ice rink there, which will provide jobs and, it'll bring people in. And it could be, the beginning of something wonderful and new for this town. So the pressure on the boys in this hockey team is absolutely astronomical. Now, the story itself is told from the perspectives of maybe a dozen, maybe a few more different characters, but in really short bursts. So it flits between all these different people. And one of the most remarkable things I think about this book is how every single one of those characters is so different, yet so fabulously realised. They are so human and flawed and utterly believable. And they all sort of come from different parts, and they've got their different histories that they're bringing to this, but they are all, zoomed in on the importance of this hockey team. Now, then an event happens, an event of really terrible violence that involves certain members of the hockey team, and it shatters the team in half, but it also shatters the town in half as everyone is forced to pick a side. And what follows is the town airing all its dirty laundry, really. And it's a story about morality and about what is good and bad, but also about, sort of having courage to, sort of stand up for yourself and other people when you recognise that something is bad. And also about loyalty and friendship and how your moral compass, your personal moral compass, can be pitted against personal loyalties and lifelong friendships, and all the repercussions, the enormous repercussions that can spin out from putting such incredible pressure on one group of children, really. They are under really, really immense pressure. And I loved this book because of all those discussions that it provokes. I loved it because of all the characters who are just fabulous. I loved the plot, and it made me go, holy moly, why are there not more novels written about sport? People, why are there not more novels written about sport? Because it is so perfect for stories. There is so much, there's suspense and competition and there's ambition, and there's this just enormous range of human emotions that can be wrapped up in sport that I just think, why are there not more fabulous novels about sport? Anyone want to answer that for me? I might know why, possibly, because apparently people who like books aren't allowed to like sport. But in this house, we got some pretty big crossover. But that said, I think that there is so much more about sort of the human experience in general to do with friendships and loyalties and morality that you could totally appreciate this book if you don't give two hoots about sport. And actually, we do watch an awful lot of sport in this house. We are a pretty sporty house, but I don't know anything about ice hockey, and I still absolutely loved that book. It was so, so great. I don't know whether I would pick up any of Fredrik Backman's other novels. The sort of subjects that they're around haven't grabbed me in the past. But now, knowing what a brilliant writer he is, I'm going to reconsider that, I think, because also I'd be a bit hypocritical if I just said you could read that book and love it if you don't care about sport, and then go, well, I wouldn't like his other books because they're about things I'm not interested in. So there you go. Maybe I shouldn't be a big fat hypocrite. But anyway, what's my point? Love that book. It's really great. So that pretty much concludes my first part of my reading wrap up for May. Sorry, I thought that was going to be a quick video. Obviously, I've talked again. I'm going to be back later in the week with a bonus video because, hold on one second, jump cut coming. Because look what the postman just delivered when I was filming. That was a seamless jump cut, wasn't it? Shall I do an unboxing? It's a moment. It's my first ever booktube unboxing. Other retailers are available. Oh gosh, it's enormous. Look! It's The Outsiders by Stephen King. So I'm going to turn this camera off. I'm going to go read it. And then I'll be back in a lot of pages. But there you go. We'll also be back next week with the other half of our reading wrap up, which is the shortlist for the Women's Prize. Oh, that's going to be a fun video. I'm going to have to be there to make sure that Scott doesn't go completely off the rails or just sit with his head in his hands for 15 minutes, in a sort of high art wrap up feedback. Anyway, stop rambling. Please do talk to me about these books. If you've read them, what you thought. I would love to know what you're reading too. In the meantime, check out bookaxe.com and I'll see you soon. Bye.